starting to texture my scene instead of Substance Painter, and I just created a new project file and imported the FBX that I sent out from Blender. And I'm just doing a quick inspection, and I thought you guys would like to see how I inspect the model to make sure that everything came in okay before I start really in earnest texturing my scene. It's important that these early stages of our texturing process have a good, consistent foundation, because in every sense, we're going to be building off of the initial settings. So let's just take a look at it real fast. I'm going to go into my views here, and I'm going to change it to 3D and 2D. And I like having this side by side because, of course, naturally I can have my 3D view over here. But I also want to make sure that the texture set is seeing the correct UVs on the appropriate texture set. So I'm on the branch texture set, so it's pulling in the correct material from Blender. Here's the flower, here's the petals, the little rods in the center, so that's all looking good. The lily pad's looking really good too. This is the top of the lily pad and the bottom. And of course, the water is just a sphere. So all of this is working exactly the way I intended it to, and I'm pretty happy with the way that this is working. So let's take for a second here. Well, let's just take a step back for a second. Change my view back to 3D only, and start the mesh baking process. It's important that we get those mesh maps in early, because a lot of our smart materials leverage the power of all of these mesh maps. So let's start baking it. So I'm in the texture set setting section of my properties area, and I'm going to cruise down to the bottom where it says bake mesh maps. In addition, FYI, if you go into the file, or excuse me, the edit pull down menu, you can also do bake mesh maps 6 to 1, half a dozen to another. You get to the exact same thing on both locations. I'm going to change the output size from my mesh maps to be quite high, 4096. I have a good computer, so this is going to go pretty fast. And I'm also going to do this individually. I'm going to use the high-res version of my trunk to just do the trunk, okay? And, I think I've made a small little mistake. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to grab the branch first. Here's a great little trick. When you're working, when you're doing your mesh map baking, always make sure you have a 2D view on in addition to your 3D view. Having both of these active is really going to help you understand if, in fact, the computer is doing what you want it to do. And I'm just going to make my 2D view just a teeny bit smaller. There we go. All right, so let's do the branch. Let's go back into the mesh map. And I'm just going to do the branch first. I know that has all of the information that came from my high-resolution sculpture. So under the high-definition mesh, let's load that one in. This is going to take a couple seconds for the computer to initiate this. Is loading in all of that geometry information into the RAM right now, and it's rocking and rolling. And you can start to see the power of having this 2D thing open as well, especially when it comes to baking your ambient occlusion maps. Those take the longest, so having a good confidence check that the computer is actually doing what it needs to be doing is a good thing. So just finished up. I baked all the mesh maps. Just doing a quick spot check on my 3D view here. Yeah, looking solid, looking just like it did over inside of Blender. Very, very pleased with that. And when it comes to the creation of all the other mesh maps, I want to make sure that I go into my high resolution area, my high definition meshes list, and subtract it, because I don't want the computer to be accessing that geometry, because it just had the geo for the high resolution sculpture for the branch. It doesn't have anything for the flower or the water, and so you're going to get some really dark, inconsistent results if you use the trunk high resolution mesh map or high resolution geometry as part of the mesh map baking system for those other objects. So let's see, I'm on, and many apologies, I forgot to grab flower. Let's zoom into the flower here real fast, and you'll start to see pretty quickly why we do this. We want the ambient occlusion and curvature channels specifically for the flowers. That's what I'm most attracted to. Just make sure we delete the high resolution geometry from the scene. We'll keep all the others in there. It goes pretty fast, or it can go pretty fast depending on your computer. Yeah, so now it's doing the ambient occlusion. This is what we're after. That ambient occlusion and that curvature pass is really what we're after when it comes to the flower and the lily pad. We're going to do the exact same thing for the lily pad. Looking good. 4096, make sure there's nothing in there. I like to do them individually. That way I have a really good understanding of what's being generated and how the computer is looking at all this information. Yeah, this is looking really good. And then last but certainly not least is the water. That's going to go in about like 10 seconds. That's going to be a super fast one. For something like the water, we don't necessarily have to bake a high mesh map because it's just going to be transparent for the most part, but we certainly could. I like to be consistent. The world space normal is a really good one to have because the world space normal can be accessed by some of our filters and our generators to place texture information on like the top, the Y positive parts of the mesh. So being able to include all that information inside of our Substance Painter texture file is really neat. Let's go back into the 3D view. Take a gander here. Take a look. Yeah, and I'm really liking this. This is starting to look really good. I'm quite pleased, more than quite pleased, with the quality of the bake on our high resolution sculpture. That's looking fantastic, as is the work that was done on the lily pad. So the baking of the mesh maps is all done. We've imported the geometry, we've baked our mesh maps, and now we're ready to start texturing our objects in our scene right here in Substance Painter.